The first thing he felt was the cold, not the kind that comes from winter wind or falling snow, but the deep, creeping cold that seeps into the bones when blood is slowly leaving the body. He lay motionless in a shallow crater, half filled with mud and rainwater, his uniform torn, soaked and darkened by blood that wasn't entirely his. Somewhere above him, boots crunched against broken stone. Voices echoed in a language he understood all too well. Enemy voices. Close. Too close. His rifle was gone. His radio was shattered. His unit had vanished. Hours earlier, he had been one soldier among many, moving forward under orders, part of something organized, protected by numbers and strategy. Now he was alone, lost behind enemy lines, wounded, disoriented, and surrounded by men who would show no mercy if they found him breathing. Every breath sent fire through his chest. Shrapnel was lodged somewhere near his ribs. He could feel it when he inhaled, a sharp reminder that time was not on his side. He knew the rules of war well enough to understand what happened to soldiers captured in this region. Survival was no longer about victory. It was about minutes, about silence, about not being seen. A flare exploded in the sky, washing the ruins in harsh white light. He pressed his face into the mud and didn't move. If they spotted him now, there would be no dramatic last stand, no heroic charge. Just a single shot, and the war would continue without him, as if he had never existed at all. But in that moment, bleeding, freezing, and completely alone, he made a decision that would determine whether he died in that crater or somehow lived long enough to tell a story no one was ever meant to hear, because against all logic, against all odds, this soldier refused to die. And what he did next would turn enemy territory into his only chance of survival. This story was never meant to survive the war. It wasn't written in official reports. It wasn't taught in military academies. And for decades, it lived only in fragments, whispered memories, personal notes, and testimonies buried under time. It is the story of a single soldier during World War II, cut off from his unit, wounded deep in enemy territory, forced to rely on instinct, pain tolerance, and decisions made under unbearable pressure. Before we continue, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from, which city and country. Stories like this traveled across borders long before the internet ever existed, and it's powerful to see how far they reach today. And if you value true war stories told with respect, realism, and depth, consider subscribing. New stories like this are shared here regularly, stories that don't glorify war, but reveal what survival truly cost. Now, let's go back to where everything went wrong. The operation had been planned for weeks. Maps were studied, routes were traced and retraced. Intelligence suggested the enemy presence was light, scattered patrols, minimal resistance. The objective was simple: advance through the ruined outskirts of a bombed-out town, secure the road, and regroup before nightfall. Nothing about the morning felt unusual. The sky was low and grey. The ground was damp from overnight rain. Boots sank slightly into the mud with every step, slowing the advance, but not raising alarm. The soldier, exhausted but focused, moved with his unit through shattered buildings and collapsed stone walls, weapon ready, eyes scanning every doorway. Then the first explosion hit. It wasn't close enough to kill, just close enough to disorient. Dirt, concrete, and metal fragments tore through the air. The blast threw him against a wall so hard the breath left his lungs in a violent gasp. His helmet flew off, his rifle slipped from his hands. Before he could recover, gunfire erupted. Not random, not panicked, controlled, precise, from multiple directions. They had walked straight into an ambush. Orders were shouted, then swallowed by the chaos. Smoke filled the street, screams cut through the noise, some in pain, some in warning. The soldier crawled toward cover, dragging himself behind the remains of a burned-out vehicle. That was when the shrapnel hit. A sharp impact slammed into his side, followed by a burning sensation that spread instantly through his chest. He pressed his hand against the wound and felt warmth soaking through his fingers. Blood. Too much blood. He tried to stand. His legs buckled. Around him the fight raged on, but it was already falling apart. The unit was splitting, soldiers retreating in different directions, each trying to survive the next few seconds. Smoke blocked visibility. The radio crackled once, then died. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time lost its meaning. When the gunfire finally began to fade, the soldier realized something horrifying. The sounds of friendly voices were gone. No commands, no footsteps rushing to regroup, no one calling his name. He was alone. The enemy hadn't withdrawn. They were repositioning. He could hear them now, moving carefully, systematically, checking the ruins one section at a time. With a wounded chest, no weapon, no radio, and no idea where his unit had gone, the soldier faced a truth every man in war fears but never believes will happen to him. He had been left behind, and in enemy territory, being left behind was often a death sentence. The silence was worse than the gunfire. After the echoes of battle faded, what remained was an unnatural stillness, broken only by distant boots, low voices, and the occasional metallic click of a weapon being checked. The soldier lay pressed against the cold ground, barely breathing. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to crawl, to escape while he still could. But instinct was fighting pain, and pain was winning. Each breath sent a sharp, tearing sensation through his chest, as if something inside him was grinding against bone. He slid his hand under his jacket again. More blood. He knew enough about wounds to understand the danger. Losing blood meant losing strength. Losing strength meant losing options. And options were the only currency he had left. Slowly, painfully, he forced himself to roll onto his side. The street where the ambush had occurred was unrecognizable now. Smoke still drifted between the ruins. Rubble blocked the road. Bodies lay motionless where they had fallen, some half covered in dust, others exposed in ways no human body ever should be. He searched for his rifle. It wasn't there. His helmet was gone. His pack gone. Everything that tied him to his unit, to his army, to safety, stripped away in minutes. What remained was the wound and the enemy. He dragged himself inch by inch toward the shadow of a collapsed building. Every movement felt loud, exaggerated. In his mind, the scrape of fabric against stone sounded like a signal flare. But no shots came. Inside the building, the air was thick with dust and decay. The roof had partially collapsed, creating a narrow space between broken beams and cracked stone. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't safe, but it was hidden. He pressed his back against the wall and focused on slowing his breathing. In, out, shallow, quiet. Each breath measured, controlled, deliberate. Hours passed that way. The sun began to sink, and with it came new dangers. Nightfall didn't mean safety. It meant uncertainty. Patrols moved differently in the dark. Mistakes became easier. Death became quieter. He tore a strip from his undershirt and wrapped it tightly around his chest, biting down on the fabric to keep from crying out. The pain was blinding, but the bleeding slowed. For the first time since the ambush, he allowed himself to think. His unit would assume he was dead. No one would come looking, not here, not behind enemy lines. Rescue was not a plan. It was a fantasy. If he wanted to live, he would have to move, but not yet. That night, enemy patrols swept the area. He heard them pass just meters away, boots crunching over debris, rifles brushing against walls, whispered exchanges in the darkness. Once, a flashlight beam cut through the gap in the rubble and brushed dangerously close to his face. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move. Minutes stretched into eternity. His muscles trembled from the effort of staying still, sweat mixed with blood along his spine. Then the light moved on. When the patrol finally disappeared into the night, The soldier remained frozen, waiting, listening, counting heartbeats. Only when the cold truly set in did he allow himself to relax, just slightly. He had survived the first night. But survival was no longer accidental. From this point on, every choice would be deliberate. Every step could betray him. Every sound could end him. And the enemy territory around him was vast, unforgiving, and awake. Morning arrived without mercy. The cold that had kept him numb through the night began to fade, replaced by pain, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. His chest burned with every breath, and when he tried to shift his weight, a wave of dizziness forced him to stop. For a long moment, he thought he might pass out. He pressed his forehead against the stone wall and waited for the spinning to settle. The smell inside the ruined building was unbearable now. Dust, mold, old smoke, and the metallic scent of dried blood. His own blood. Staying here was no longer an option. Daylight was dangerous, but remaining wounded in the same place for too long was worse. Enemy patrols rarely searched the same ruins twice, but when they did it thoroughly. He needed distance. Slowly, painfully, he began to crawl. Every movement was calculated. He shifted his weight, using his elbows, keeping pressure off his chest. His boots dragged uselessly behind him. Sweat soaked his clothes despite the chill. His jaw clenched so tightly, his teeth ached. Outside, the town was waking up. Not like a normal town. No voices of civilians, no morning routines, just the quiet activity of occupation. Trucks in the distance, metal clanking. Short commands barked and answered. Enemy-controlled territory. He waited for a gap, then crossed the open street in stages, dragging himself from shadow to shadow. The rubble scraped his hands raw. More than once he had to stop and lie flat as footsteps passed nearby. At one point, he pressed himself into a doorway just as a group of soldiers marched past, laughing about something he couldn't understand. Close enough that he could smell tobacco on their breath. When they were gone, his body shook uncontrollably. Not fear, exhaustion. By midday, hunger joined the pain. He hadn't eaten since before the operation. His stomach cramped violently, making him nauseous. His mouth felt dry and sticky, his tongue heavy. Dehydration was already setting in. He searched the buildings carefully. Most had been stripped bare long ago. Broken furniture, empty shelves, shattered glass. In one apartment, he found a cracked ceramic bowl with rainwater collected inside. It was cloudy. Dirty. He drank it anyway. The water tasted like rust and ash, but it soothed his throat just enough to keep him moving. That was when he made his first mistake. As he crawled through the back of a partially collapsed house, a loose piece of wood shifted under his weight and snapped loudly. The sound echoed far more than he expected. He froze. Seconds passed, then voices, sharp, alert, close. He heard boots running, not walking this time. A command was shouted, another answered, weapons were raised. Panic surged through him like electricity. He dragged himself forward desperately, ignoring the pain tearing through his chest. His vision blurred at the edges. The room spun. He felt himself weakening, strength draining faster than he could replace it. A flashlight beam sliced through the doorway behind him. Too close. He collapsed behind a fallen wardrobe and lay flat, pressing his face into the dirt. His heart pounded so violently he was sure they could hear it. The beam swept across the room, paused, shifted. He saw boots step into the doorway. A shadow filled the opening. If they looked down, just slightly, it would be over. He didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. After what felt like an eternity, the soldier cursed softly and stepped back. The beam disappeared. The footsteps retreated. Only then did the pain overwhelm him. He blacked out. When he came to, the light had changed, late afternoon. His body felt heavier, weaker. He had lost more blood during the escape. This time, survival wasn't about courage or instinct. It was about stubborn refusal. He tore another strip of fabric and tightened the bandage, biting his sleeve to keep from screaming. He forced himself upright, shaking, unsteady, but alive. He couldn't stay in the town. Urban ruins were crawling with patrols. Every sound echoed. Every shadow betrayed movement. He needed open ground. He needed the forest. As night approached, he crawled toward the edge of the town, using collapsed walls and ditches for cover. Each meter felt like a kilometer. His arms trembled violently. His breathing was shallow and ragged. Just before darkness fell, he reached the tree line. The forest swallowed him whole. Branches scratched at his face. Roots caught his boots. The ground sloped unevenly, forcing him to stop repeatedly just to steady himself. But for the first time since the ambush, there were no voices, no boots, no flashlights, only wind, distant artillery, and the sound of his own breathing. He collapsed beneath a cluster of trees and lay there, staring up at the sky through broken branches. He was still in enemy territory, still wounded, still alone. But he had survived another day. And as darkness closed in, one thought became painfully clear. If he was going to make it out alive, this forest would either become his shelter or his grave. The forest did not welcome him. It didn't offer warmth. It didn't offer comfort. It offered only one thing: distance. And even that came with a cost. The moment he stopped moving, the cold returned. Not the sharp cold of open air, but the wet, heavy cold that clung to skin and soaked into fabric. His uniform was still damp from the crater, still stained from the ambush, still stiff where blood had dried. Now the forest air added another layer: fog, moisture, rot. He tried to sleep. His body refused. Every time he closed his eyes, pain yanked him awake. The shrapnel near his ribs felt like a jagged stone lodged under his skin. Breathing was shallow and thin, like he was borrowing air rather than owning it. And the bandage around his chest had tightened during the day, sticky with dried blood and sweat. When sleep finally came, it was not rest. It was collapse. He dreamed of his unit calling him. He turned toward the sound, stepping through smoke, reaching out, only to find himself alone again. Always alone, always behind. He woke with his teeth chattering, and with the first hint of dawn, he realized the most terrifying truth so far. He was getting worse. His wound wasn't just painful, it was changing. The skin around the bandage was hot to the touch. His head felt heavy. His thoughts came slower, like his mind was wading through mud. When he sat up, dizziness hit so hard he nearly vomited. Fever, infection. In peacetime, infection was a problem. In enemy territory, with no medical supplies and no help, infection was a death sentence that simply took longer to complete. He forced himself to stand. His legs shook. He tried to walk, but his balance was off. He leaned against a tree, pressing his forehead into bark, breathing slowly until the spinning settled. The forest smelled of wet leaves and soil. Somewhere deeper, something moved. An animal, most likely. But every sound still triggered the same instinctive fear. Someone is coming. He moved anyway. He followed the forest edge, keeping low, using the terrain for cover. He avoided clearings. He avoided trails. He avoided anything that looked like it could lead to people. But the problem with avoiding people is that it also means avoiding food. By late morning, hunger had become something else, not a simple ache, a consuming force. His stomach cramped so violently he had to stop and press his fist into his abdomen. His mouth was dry again, but this time there was no rainwater bowl waiting in a ruined apartment. The forest had streams, but streams had risks: open ground, noise, visibility. Still, dehydration was faster than starvation. It would kill him first. He found a shallow creek and waited, watching for movement. Minutes passed. Nothing. No voices, no footsteps, no gunmetal glint through trees. He crawled to the water and drank. It was cold and clean enough that it tasted almost sweet. He drank until his stomach hurt, then splashed water onto his face and neck, trying to cool the fever. For a few minutes he felt clearer, more awake. Then the fever surged back like a tide. By afternoon, the world began to soften at the edges. Trees blurred. Shadows stretched strangely. Sounds felt distant. His thoughts drifted, then snapped back in panic. He had to keep reminding himself where he was. Enemy territory. If he collapsed in the wrong place, he would wake up staring at a rifle barrel if he woke up at all. He needed food, but food meant risk. He began searching the forest floor, scanning for anything edible. Berries were dangerous. Some would kill you quicker than the enemy. Mushrooms were worse. He found nothing he trusted. Then, in the distance, he heard something that stopped him cold. A dog. Not a wild animal, a dog barking, sharp and trained. And beneath it, voices, close enough to matter, close enough to end him. He dropped to the ground and crawled uphill, keeping his body low, his breathing shallow. He moved through thick brush until he found a place where he could see without being seen. Through the trees, he spotted them. A patrol. 4 soldiers moving slowly, scanning the area. And behind them, a handler with a dog, nose to the ground, leash tight, a tracking dog. The worst kind of enemy for a man trying to disappear. His blood ran cold. He stayed frozen, watching. The dog pulled slightly to the left. The handler corrected it. The dog circled, sniffed again, then barked once, short and sharp. The patrol paused. One soldier raised his hand. Another shifted his rifle, alert. They didn't know where he was, but they knew something was here. The soldier pressed his face into the dirt and forced his mind to think through the fever. Wind direction. Scent. Blood. His blood trail. He had been leaking it for 2 days now. Not much at a time, but enough. Enough for a dog to notice. The patrol moved again, angled closer. The dog pulled. The handler followed. Panic surged, but he did not run. Running in the forest meant snapping branches, leaving clearer tracks, making noise. Running would finish him. He needed to break the dog, break the trail, and then he saw it. A narrow patch of muddy ground leading down toward the creek. Water. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the only one he had. He crawled backwards, then slid downhill, using roots and brush to keep from falling. Pain flared in his chest with every jolt, but adrenaline kept him moving. He reached the creek and stepped into it. Cold water wrapped around his boots, then his calves. He moved upstream, forcing himself to keep his feet beneath the surface, pushing through the pain as the water stole warmth from his legs. He moved slowly, silently, the current washing away scent, washing away blood. Upstream he found a fallen log bridging the water. He pulled himself beneath it, pressing his body into the shadows, half submerged, barely breathing. He waited. Minutes later the barking returned, closer. Then it stopped. He heard the patrol near the creek, boots on mud, voices, the dog sniffing frantically, the handler giving quiet commands. His heart pounded so hard he thought it would give him away. Then the dog barked again, confused this time. It circled. It sniffed the water. It whined. The handler muttered, frustrated. The dog had the scent, but the trail had been swallowed by the current. For a moment, it seemed like it had worked. Then a soldier stepped closer, peering into the water, scanning the banks. The soldier's eyes narrowed. He pointed toward the log. The soldier behind him raised his rifle. The wounded man knew he had seconds. If they fired into the shadows, he wouldn't have the strength to swim away. If they approached, he couldn't fight. He made the most dangerous choice yet. He dove deeper beneath the log, holding his breath, pressing his chest against the cold mud, letting the pain scream through his ribs as he stayed underwater. The world became muffled. Boots splashed near him. He heard voices above the surface, distorted. The rifle barrel dipped into the water, probing. Mud clouded around him, turning the creek into darkness. His lungs burned. The fever made his head spin. He could feel his body begging for air. But he stayed down. A second longer, then another. Just when he thought he couldn't, when the burning in his lungs became unbearable, he felt the rifle pull back. The boots stepped away. The voices faded. The dog barked once more, then was dragged reluctantly downstream. Only when silence returned did he rise, gasping quietly, face inches from the log, eyes wide with shock. He had survived, but the cold water had done something else. It had shocked his body. His wound throbbed violently now, and the fever returned stronger than before. He stumbled out of the creek, nearly collapsing on the bank. Night was coming again. And now he knew the truth. The enemy wasn't just nearby. They were actively hunting. His survival had become a moving target, and if he stayed in the forest much longer, infection would finish what bullets couldn't, which meant the next step was the most terrifying one of all. If he wanted to live, he would have to go toward people. He would have to risk everything, to find food, shelter, and a way to treat the wound. And in enemy territory, the wrong person could kill him faster than the war ever could. By the time the forest began to thin, the soldier was barely holding himself together. The fever came in waves now. One moment his thoughts were sharp and focused. The next, the world tilted, and sounds stretched unnaturally, as if reality itself were pulling away from him. His uniform clung to his body, stiff and heavy. The bandage around his chest was soaked again, and the skin beneath it burned like fire. He had stopped counting the days. Time had dissolved into a simple pattern. Move, hide, breathe, survive. Ahead of him, through a break in the trees, he saw something that made his heart stutter. A farmhouse. It stood alone in a shallow valley, its roof dark against the grey sky, a thin line of smoke rising from a chimney. A dirt path led to it, marked by wagon tracks and footprints. Near the side of the house, a small shed leaned at an angle, and beyond it, fenced fields stretched toward the horizon. Civilian land, occupied land, hope, and danger wrapped together. He dropped to the ground and watched. For a long time. No soldiers in sight, no trucks, no patrols, just the slow, ordinary movements of a place trying to exist under the shadow of war. A door opened. A figure stepped outside. An older man, judging by the way he walked. He carried a bucket, moved toward a well, then disappeared back inside, the soldier's mouth filled with saliva, water, food, shelter, and betrayal. He knew the risks. Some civilians helped soldiers like him, quietly, at enormous personal risk. Others had learned that cooperation with occupying forces meant protection, rations, survival. Turning in an enemy soldier could bring rewards, or at least keep suspicion away. Approaching the house openly was suicide. But doing nothing meant bleeding out in the woods. As the afternoon wore on, the soldier noticed something else. No flags, no uniforms drying on the line, no vehicles, just a farm trying to survive. As evening fell, he made his move. He waited until the light softened, until the long shadows stretched across the fields. Then, keeping low, he crawled toward the shed, using the tall grass for cover. Each movement felt heavier than the last. His legs trembled violently now, barely responding. When he reached the shed, he collapsed against its wall, chest heaving. He waited. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Slowly, carefully, he scratched a small mark into the wood with a piece of metal he had found earlier, a symbol his army used, simple but recognizable. A silent message to anyone who knew what to look for. I am here. I am wounded. Then he waited again. Night came quickly. The farmhouse lights flickered on. The smell of cooking drifted faintly through the air, twisting his hunger into something almost unbearable. His stomach cramped painfully, and his vision blurred. At last, the door opened. The older man stepped out again, this time holding a lantern. He moved toward the shed, slowly, cautiously, as if he already suspected something. The soldier pressed himself deeper into the shadows. The man stopped a few meters away. "Who's there?" he whispered, his voice tight with fear. The soldier swallowed. Speaking could change everything. "I'm injured," he said quietly, his voice hoarse and barely audible. "I won't hurt you." The lantern lifted slightly, the light trembling. The man saw him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the man lowered the lantern just enough to hide the soldier from the house. "Stay quiet," he murmured. "If they hear you, we both die." Inside the shed, the man worked quickly. He brought water first, then bread. The soldier ate slowly, forcing himself not to devour it, knowing too much too fast would make him sick. The water felt like life itself, cooling his throat, clearing his head, just enough to stay conscious. When the man saw the wound, his face tightened. "This is bad," he said softly. "If infection spreads—" He didn't finish the sentence. The man cleaned the wound as best he could, using boiled water and cloth. The pain nearly broke the soldier, but he didn't cry out. Not once. "You can't stay here," the man said finally. "They search farms, not every day, but often." The soldier nodded weakly. "I just need one night," he said. "Then I'll go." The man hesitated. Then he nodded. That night, the soldier slept in the shed, wrapped in old blankets, his body shaking as the fever fought whatever strength he had left. The man returned once more, bringing a small bottle, alcohol. "Pain," he said, "an infection. Not a cure, but it helps." The soldier thanked him with a look too exhausted for words. Near dawn, the sound came. Engines, vehicles, voices. The farmer burst into the shed, eyes wide with terror. "They're here," he whispered. "Someone must have talked." The soldier forced himself upright, panic slicing through the fog in his head. "How many?" he asked. "Too many," the man replied. There was no time to run, no time to hide. The soldier stumbled toward the back of the shed, just as boots hit the yard. Commands were shouted. A dog barked. The farmer grabbed his arm. "Go through the field," he hissed. "Follow the ditch. Don't look back." The soldier didn't hesitate. He ran. Every step felt like his chest was tearing open. His vision narrowed, the world collapsing into sound and pain and motion. Shouts erupted behind him. A shot rang out, cracking past his head. He dove into the ditch as bullets tore through the grass above him. Mud filled his mouth. He crawled forward, dragging himself through water and filth, using the last of his strength to stay low, stay alive. Behind him, chaos. The farmer shouting, soldiers yelling, the dog barking wildly. Then another sound, an explosion. The earth shook. Smoke rose behind him as he crawled onward, away from the farm, away from the one place that had given him a chance. He didn't know if the farmer lived. He didn't know if the soldiers followed. He only knew that his body was failing. And just as the forest rose again ahead of him, his legs gave out. He collapsed. Darkness closed in, and for the first time since the ambush, he truly believed this was the end. He woke up to silence. Not the heavy, threatening silence of enemy patrols, but a different kind. A calm silence, one that didn't vibrate with danger. For a moment, he thought he was dead. His body felt distant, numb, as if it no longer belonged to him. The pain was still there, but dulled, pushed far away. He tried to open his eyes. Light, blinding white light. Voices followed, low, urgent, unfamiliar, but not hostile. Hands touched him, firm but careful. Someone spoke close to his ear. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He wasn't alone anymore. When consciousness fully returned, he realized he was inside a medical tent. Canvas walls, the sharp smell of antiseptic, the distant rumble of artillery, not close, not immediate, friendly territory. Somehow, impossibly, he had crossed back. Later, he would learn how close he had come to dying in that ditch, how the infection had nearly reached his lungs, how another few hours in the cold would have been enough to end him. He would learn that a forward patrol had found him just before dawn, alerted by distant gunfire and smoke near the farm. They almost missed him, almost stepped over him in the grass. Almost. Recovery took weeks, then months. The war, of course, did not stop. Men continued to fight. Towns continued to burn. Orders continued to be given by people far from the front lines. But for him, the war had changed forever. He had seen what it meant to be truly alone in it. Years later, when the war finally ended, he returned home thinner, quieter, and older than his age. He didn't talk much about what had happened behind enemy lines, not because he forgot, but because words felt too small for what he had lived through. Only fragments came out. The cold, the silence, the sound of boots passing inches away, the face of a farmer risking everything for a stranger. For decades, the story remained buried. No medals were given for surviving alone. No parades were held for men who crawled through mud and water just to see another sunrise. But survival was its own victory. In old age, when asked how he endured it, how he kept going when everything was lost, he answered simply, "I didn't think about the war. I thought about the next breath." And that is the truth most war stories leave out. Survival isn't heroic speeches or last stands. It's silence, pain, fear, and the stubborn refusal to give up, even when the world has already moved on without you. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, even for a moment, then it deserves to be remembered. Because history isn't only written by generals and victories. Sometimes it survives because one wounded soldier refused to die, alone, in enemy territory.